Welcome everyone to Put Lyd On It. Thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited about this conversation. It's something that's very dear to me, and I'm so excited about the amazing volunteer speakers that I have that have volunteered their time in a busy day to share their experiences and stuff. And so here's what I'm talking about. Am I on you? I know so many women and who in business, in the workplace, who just feel unheard. Whether it be, having to repeat yourself or just feeling that your contributions and stuff in the workplace are falling on deaf ears. And so it's a conversation meant to have in this environment right now where we're really hearing diversity, equity, and inclusion being mentioned everywhere, and organizations adopting this new, this new concept. We want to make sure we understand exactly what it means to have diversity, equity, and inclusion in business and in workplace, and address the challenges that women have, the unique challenge that we have of feeling unheard, and how we can overcome that, and how we can be allies for each other and grow and that experience. I want to start by saying that this is a judgment-free zone. At Put Lyd On It, we want to have open and honest conversations. We want to invite people to ask questions, make comments without feeling that they're going to be canceled. So with that said, I really want us to be mindful of that. If we're going to grow and become better versions of ourselves, we have to be able to have these conversations without feeling that there's going to be some kind of repercussion. So with that said, I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'm so excited to have. We have Raphael Richard from T. Howard, and he's first of all, having a man here, I want to say kudos, being courageous and brave here. And Raphael has experience with unconscious bias training. So I thought I'm really excited to have him here to kind of chime in and how he educates people to not only acknowledge and identify unconscious bias, but how to deal with it, how to overcome it and become better versions of ourselves. We have Shelley Rear from the FICPA, which is an organization that's very dear to me as a CPA. And Shelley is, she's such an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it was so important that I have her on here. Just a rock star, and I love talking to her. It's just, whenever I'm done talking to Shelley, I feel invigorated. I feel like I just want to go and take over the world. So I'm so excited to have you here, Shelley. Then we have my sister friend, Ashaki Bronson Marcellus. We've known each other for years. Of such a huge support system for me. She's like one of my go-to people to ask questions. An amazing banker at Bank United, a VP of commercial lending. And so I'm so excited to have Ashaki here to discuss some of her experiences being a phenomenal woman for her organization and in different environments. So all of you, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to start with just a very, very simple question. What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? I'll start with you, Shelley.
For me, when I think about D&I and DE&I, importantly, is an important distinction. I always think about, as leading a company or an organization or a department or whatever your particular role is in business, that we should strive to have an employee set that is diverse as the audience that we're serving. And to me, when you think about, we're based in Florida, Lydia and I, and when you think about the population of Florida and how it is one of the most diverse populations in the state of Florida, I want to make sure that our employees at the organization, as well as our members and all of the programs that we are doing, are going to get us to a place where we are as diverse as the population that we're serving. So that's always my North Star and my guiding light. And it opens up so many lanes of opportunities for strategy and overcoming obstacles when you think of it from that lens. So that's always my North Star.
Love it. Ashaki, what does DE&I mean to you?
Yes. So, well, thank you for having me here. When I think of it, it's not a buzzword for me, right? It's including everyone. It's all voices matter. It's all opinions matter. It's listening. It's following through. It's all of that, and it's making sure that everyone has a seat at the table, and that it doesn't matter what race, what gender, what background, or what anything that you come from, that if you have an opinion to share, if you have feedback, if you have thoughts, if you have any of that, that it's welcome. It's it's an opportunity to welcome that, and it's an opportunity that you should feel open and included to make sure that what you're saying is actually matter and not falling on deaf ears. So that's what it encompasses, all of that to me when I think of DEI.
Thank you. And Raphael, let's hear what you had to say about DE&I.
Yeah, I think for me, even though it's the work that I do, it's super personal for me. I'm a Black gay man with a disability from the South, right? And so when you combine all of those things, DEI for me looks like a place where I can be my authentic self, particularly at work, at home, wherever I am, be myself in those spaces where all of those identities are represented, but also all those identities are feel included and valued. And I think by my identities being included and valued, that opens up space for everyone's identities to be included and valued without them having to even acknowledge that, right? And so I'm very open about my Blackness, my queerness, and my disability, but some people may not be. But if it's inclusive for me and I can provide space where it can be inclusive for everyone, I think all around diversity and inclusion, that's what it looks like for me. It's a personal lived experience day to day.
Thank you. I love that. And so when I think about DE&I and everything that you all just said, so being represented, being at the table, feeling included, and you hear people who don't quite get that, why that's important, how do we communicate that to them? Those people who are like, well, why is it important to have someone? And we just need to get the work done. What do we say, and how do we communicate to people the importance of having everyone feel included and having more diversity in a workplace?
You want to start with that? Yeah, I think a part of it, unfortunately, sometimes you have to provide the business context, right? And we talk dollar and cents. So we know that, companies where you have a more diverse workforce, or sometimes in some spaces more idea generated, more innovation happens by the team being more diverse. To Shelley's point, those ideas are there, and everyone can present those. So one is making the business case outside of just being the right thing to do. But I think also in that, it's about retention. And a lot of times we look at diversity as that number, right? And so, oh yes, we need to hire more Black folks, hire more women, hire more people with this. But once they're there, how do we make them or help them feel included? And so I think that's the other business case for that, because if I leave a company and I speak negatively about that and I'm never coming back, neither are my friends, or neither are the people that look like me, or neither of those people that have the identity, they know that I had that experience. So it's a business case for for now and in the future. And so that's why, we see this shift, because there's for a lot of companies, because there's an increased awareness of diversity and inclusion from the lowest levels of the organization all the way to the highest levels. People want to know what's going on. And so we have to create that business case for it, alongside it being the right thing to do. Okay,
thank you so much. So when we talk about diversity, as you mentioned, there's so much, right? There's so many different identities that we need to have included in these organizations. Now here at Put Lyd On It, we're all about women, right? So I want to ask Ashaki and Shelley, if you can share some of the experiences where you felt you were unheard, or that your contributions and opinions were not valued.
Yeah, I can share a story that I think will resonate. Oh, I'm sorry, Ashaki. Forgive me. I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead. Go right ahead. Go right ahead. I'll go after.
It's the curse of Zoom, right? I think about this happened to me a couple of years ago. I was asked to represent my prior employer and the industry that we were representing on a couple of task forces with the White House related to education and workforce development. It was a tremendous opportunity for me from a professional development perspective, but also was just so grateful that my CEO really put trust in me to represent us and our industry on these task forces. And she was a female and always a great mentor to me. But as is the case, if anyone that works in the federal government can probably appreciate, but oftentimes you'll get into these meetings and it becomes clear, really quickly that you might be the sole female or the sole young female or whatever the situation merits. And so there was this one meeting in particular where it was high stakes, high pressure. We had media cameras on us from all over the place. We had multiple cabinet secretaries and folks from the White House at the table. And it was myself and maybe about 20 or so other task force members, of which there were a couple of females, but it was mostly males on the task force for this particular one. And it was a situation where, we all had to kind of contribute to the conversation, offer our insight, and we were giving very constructive feedback to the White House on a particular issue. In this case, it was around apprenticeship programs. And, you sit around the table and you hear everybody else go. And as I sat there, I kept thinking about my CEO at the time, again, who was this superpower female executive, and what would she want me to say, and how could I stand out? And I kept thinking that I was actually given a blessing, because here I was in this place where I was automatically different, being one of the lone females at the table, and I was by far the youngest female at the table as well. So how can I use that to my advantage to stand out and differentiate what I'm going to say? So I didn't think about it from the lens of, oh gosh, I don't look like everybody else here. I thought about it from I'm going to use this as a strength and play the card. And so when it got to me and I'd kind of let everybody else talk for a bit, and Ivanka Trump was sitting in the room as well, I said, well, listen, I think we all have to lead by example. And as a young mother at the time, my kids were, 2 and 4 or something like that. I said, I'm going to give you my word that my kids will know about apprenticeship, and I'm going to encourage them to, go on this particular career path journey when the time comes. And it was so different than what everybody else had said at the table that it got the attention of the media cameras. It got the attention of the cabinet secretaries. And so for me, I think we have to be aware of what's happening around us, be confident in our opinion, not be afraid to be different, but actually use that difference to our advantage. I was the only one at the table that could speak from that particular lens and that particular view. And I used that to get heard, if you will. So just a great story of a way that you can approach it.
I absolutely love that, and I took note of that, about the importance of showing up with that confidence, and where we can come into a room thinking, okay, well, I'm the oddball out, so that's a disadvantage, but actually turning it around and seeing it and using it to your advantage. I think that's very, very powerful, and a lot of people can use that when they go into a room, regardless of what that difference is, and using it to your advantage. So I love that. Ashaki, have you had any experiences like that where, again, you felt unheard, or that you were the odd man out, the odd woman out?
Yeah. So I would say, at work, I think specifically within my industry, you find that a lot, right? So I probably have loads of examples, but I can probably think of one in particular where that I think men can typically gravitate to another man to select for like an opportunity or a project or different things that are coming up. And I can specifically recall a time where my boss is female, and her boss is actually male. And there was a project coming up, a great opportunity, and he automatically thought of one of my colleagues, right? And my boss, who I love to death, was a complete advocate for me, and was like, no, I think Ashaki and him can both do this together. Let's kind of have them partner with it together so that we could see, what they can do from it. And, and he agreed because, there was no really reason that he hadn't thought of me. I think it just was a natural instinct for him to gravitate to this male for an opportunity. So we wound up, trying to capitalize on the project together, trying to work together, where that he literally dropped the ball on the project, right? And I actually wound up doing that and more, and making it such a great success, a great story, a great something really valid that can come out of it. And then this male actually wound up resigning and leaving the organization. And my boss and I always kind of joke with him and saying, this is the one that you selected. Like, you really need to kind of look out of yourself and kind of really see who's actually here, who's been loyal, who actually does the work, works just as hard, works harder, has been successful, and on par. We're doing the same, and I'm probably actually doing a lot more and actually contributed a lot more. And I wasn't the first person that he thought of. So it's just those kind of things that I think you have to just kind of push through it and just show that much more of what you contribute, so that they can kind of sometimes really see it for what it is. So it was a good learning story. So I always hold that against him now. I joke with him on that. So.
Raphael, I great. I feel like you have something to say.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think that is like the core of like how unconscious bias works, right? And so we learn and we have these expectations of what certain group members can do, what women can do, their competence level. And that's based on things we start learning very early, some of these assigned roles of competence and what they are. And then a lot of times, for men, may get placed in these stretch assignments, right? So yeah, they may not be quite ready, but through assumed competence, let's make Joe over here the director versus Ashaki, because we have this assumed competence and assumed competence. And then I think the term that within unconscious bias we call that arbitrary status hierarchy, right? And so it's these arbitrary things that we think about that are assigned to certain things. So, and I am guilty of it too. And I think we were talking about this just before the panel started. My partner, who's a man, works in healthcare. And we live in a city where there's a lot of hospitals. In Baltimore, Johns Hopkins is one of the largest referral hospitals. And we were passing by and I saw these two women in scrubs, and I was, I the little knowledge I do know about hospital shifts, that 7 to 7 for nurses. And I was like, oh, I guess the nurse shifts just ended. And he looked at me and said, they're both MDs. And my mouth just dropped, because doing this work, I also have that bias, and where I assume that, I associate, women with nurses and men with doctors. And so it's all something that we have to, unlearn. And part of the unlearning of that is seeing more people in those roles, and why companies need that diversity. We see more people, and then we have that path. And then also these assumptions we make on competence levels begin to decrease, because we see people doing well in those roles. So
I love that you shared that, and your own side, because we all have biases, right? Yeah. And I think my thought is that some people have a challenge acknowledging those biases, because acknowledging that bias means I'm an evil person, I'm a horrible person, I should have known this. And so I want to highlight the idea, or the fact that when we are, and it's called unconscious for a reason, right? It's because we don't realize it, and it doesn't mean that people are ill-intentioned, but just because you're not ill-intentioned doesn't mean you do not have a responsibility to improve. So let's talk about that for a little bit, in terms of acknowledging and being able to see, how do we identify these biases, right? Because it's not like this antenna goes off like, oh, an alarm is wrong. Like, okay, something's going wrong. How can we identify these things? How do we walk into a room and some key words or some things that that you hear and you're like, okay, we need to do something about this? And then my follow-up question is, what are some things that we can do about it respectfully?
Yeah, definitely. I wonder if Shelly or Shaki has any insight on that, and then I'm happy to chime in after them. Definitely.
Yes, I would love a Shaki and Shelly this week, because sorry, you bring up another thing that sorry for talking so much. I have so many notes, because we were just so much to unpack here. But and the other thing, as I mentioned before we went live, is that yes, we're talking about women in business. So I want to be careful not to sound as it's men versus women, because we have unconscious bias as well. Yes. As women, sometimes do we take heed more to when a man speaks versus when a woman speaks, So, Shaki and Shelly, as women, what are some things that, you feel that perhaps as women, we have these kind of biases, and how we can identify in other people?
I think with women have a tendency, I have seen and noticed that sometimes we're harder on each other. right, than necessarily a man that's that can do the same thing. So I think we're harder on each other and we're a little bit more judgmental. So I think it's important when you say to recognize those kind of biases. I think a lot of times we don't realize that. So you have to be very self-reflective and kind of really know yourself and be willing to check yourself, right? If there's something that, you know, women automatically, just even outside of the business place, if a woman walks in to a restaurant or walks into a room or whatever, women are automatically, I wouldn't say sizing her up, but you're doing this comparison. You're looking at maybe at her hair or her shoes and what she has on. Men don't do that, right? Men don't do that. Men can walk in the room with a towel on and they don't really care. They'll get the job. It doesn't matter. But I think women, we automatically do that because I don't know, I guess maybe it's this comparison thing or whatever. So I think it's always so important to kind of really kind of be reflective of that. So I'm always very intentional. So if there's another woman, especially within my realm of my industry and different things, I try to overdo and over welcome and make sure that she's, you know, confident and that she's in the room and that she gets heard. And I'll even ask a question if I notice that she's quiet. So I'll do those different things because I think sometimes women are seen as timid and shy and maybe not, you know, don't necessarily stick up for themselves. You know, I'll preface that I'm from New York, so I know nothing about any of that, right? Because we're born a lot different. So we come out very strong and demanding and know what we want and very assertive from the beginning. But when I see that there may be others that may not, I kind of make sure that I'm guiding, right, and that I'm making sure that that they are being heard. And a lot of times, females that I work with and different things, they appreciate that because I think sometimes people get taken aback by that. But I think it's just something that you have to really know within yourself and kind of make sure that you're being aware of it. Because like you said, sometimes it is unconscious. And if someone does call you out and mention it, you have to be open to that feedback and see how you can kind of change that. And I think that's what I've done with it. I try to be very intentional with my interactions with other women.
I love that. So it starts with the self, with some introspection, right? Once you can identify your own unconscious behaviors, then it's probably easier to identify when other people are doing it. And hopefully we can step in and do that. Somebody just posted a comment about it, you know, we were trained to do that by like society. And so let's talk a little bit about that. The images we see on television or in the workplace, and which I think is going to circle right back to why it's so important to have DE&I in every organization. And Rafael, you are smiling so hard. I feel like you have something to say, so go ahead, let's say it.
Well, I'm smiling so hard because that's my mom that posted that. So I want to talk a little bit about is the way that we were trained, and I may get in trouble for this, and use an example that actually happened around Christmas a few years ago. I was at home and my mom does these elaborate Christmas trees every year. And each year she picks a 2 to 3 color theme and it's that. And so I have a few nieces and nephews and we're doing some Christmas decorating for the tree. And then my mom said, you know, this year the colors were like the neon type. So neon, pink, blue, and green. They're doing ornaments. And she said, the pink is for the girls and the blue is for the boys. And, you know, I'm looking at my nieces and nephews and I'm going, it's for whatever color anyone wants to use. And my mom, you know, I said the pink. It was this space where, yes, and that is the way that we were trained. So Mom, I agree with you. This is the way that we were trained. But I think now is the time where we begin to like unlearn some of those things, you know, as particularly and take notice of that. And so definitely agree with Ashaki, but part of it is unlearn our unconscious bias and what we do there, but it's also learning where we have privilege, because if we understand where we have privileges at work and in society, we can understand how to make some space for some other folks. And I do want to, I appreciate the examples that were given, but give like 6 things that we can all do when we're in meetings at work or in spaces that we can take note of and really assess from our companies and ourselves. Some of them we've mentioned. So one is talking over others. Like who's talking over others, like taking note of that and just looking at it. The other one is who's taking credit for ideas. You had a good discussion of that, people taking, you know, credit for something you said. And then failing to take some ideas seriously. So if someone brings something up, it's like, oh no, that can't happen. And then, you know, we move on. So who's doing that and who's creating that? Also making assumptions that women may speak for their group, right? Or men may speak for their group, or a gay person may speak for that group. Who's making those assumptions on behalf of women that you, Lydia, can now speak for all women when that happens. And the other ones is making assumptions on who will have a greater influence over group decisions. So if there's a group decision, who's usually the one that, has the greatest influence that, and then assuming that their opinion or someone else's opinion on the team may count more. And the last is, that correcting others is another form of bias that we see. Correcting others or articulating their ideas in another way. So you may say like, hey, the sky is blue. And then, a man may come behind you and say, well, the sky is blue, but, it has hints of white clouds in it to really make that point more clear, right? And so how those 6 things are things that we should be looking for in meetings. And then, for men and then for women, or for that, take note and just write down how you see that playing out, and then how you may want to bring that other, or how you can really interrupt and intervene when those things happen. And I think last point I'll make is how we can interrupt and intervene, just very briefly in a soft way. We're probably all familiar with microaggressions, but I want to add another term there, micro affirmations, right? And so if a woman makes a point that we know is clear, and with someone's tendency to cut her off, like affirm. Hi, I think Shelly just made a great point. Affirm Shelly's point. Nod your head when you see women making points, or don't wait till after the meeting and say, oh, hey, Shelly, that was a really great idea. Sorry that Bob didn't think about it. No, it needs to happen in that meeting, and everyone needs to see that. So micro affirmations. So I encourage everyone to use some affirmations in the space to support women and other marginalized groups.
I absolutely love that, those tips, and I saw someone comment that she loves those, so that's awesome. Here's the thing that I think all women, and this maybe comes from a place of fear. And Ashaki, I know you said you're from New York, and Shelly, you're just like a rock star. So I know maybe this doesn't apply to you, but for other women out there who have that fear of speaking up because I'm going to be seen as the emotional woman, especially for Black women, the angry Black woman, these stereotypes or these things that we're afraid of. So what advice would you give to a woman who feels that way, who feels that, okay, I know I need to say something, but I know if I do, they're gonna label me XYZ. What sort of advice would you give to the person in that place? Shelly?
For me, I think at the end of the day, be confident and know your strengths and also know your weaknesses. So I always try to live by the motto of, show your value all the time. Show what value you bring to the organization, no matter if you're an entry-level employee or the CEO. So if it were me and something like that happened to me, I would come prepared. I mean, my brain kind of works in more of I'm going to get my argument together, right? So I'm going to have my facts. I'm going to justify my idea or whatever the proposition is with backed up data and thoughtful consideration, and be really confident when I go. Unfortunately, I think when people speak from a place of emotion, which oftentimes can happen in these situations, they probably are not taken as seriously. And Raphael can correct me if I'm wrong here as the expert, than when you're coming from a place of fact, if you will. That would be my approach. But I think it's also important that you identify and recognize to whomever you're speaking to how what happened made you feel, because we're not going to make these changes and sort of change the culture of our society and corporate America if people don't recognize the mistake that they've made. So I wouldn't also shy away from pointing it out and giving, to Raphael's point, an example of, what you felt was incorrect.
I love that. And when you do that, when you do go and have these conversations, it has to be from a place of, finding a solution, right? As opposed to maybe shunning that person, because what we discussed is that it's unconscious. Like there are a lot of cases where people maybe don't realize that they've done something offensive or done something to make you feel less than. And so being able to have that conversation and communicate that in a way that fosters, a discussion rather than attacking somebody or especially now again in this is the cancel culture that we're in right now. And like Mom said, society has trained a lot of people this way. And so we have to have a process of unlearning and understand the role that we play in that unlearning. So that leads me to my next question, which I wanted to know. Shelly, you give the example of going to talk to that person. I've heard some people argue, and I've seen on, Facebook posts when certain things happen, with Black Lives Matter or anything else in that, Pride Month or whatever, people are just like, well, it's not my position. It's not my job to educate people. It's not my job to get them to see. Whose job is it? If we're going to get to the next level, whose job or responsibility is it to have these conversations and initiate these conversations?
Everyone.
I think it's both. I think it's our job. I think it's their job. I think it's everyone's job, right? Because I think a lot of people can walk around. Ignorance is bliss, right? If you don't you don't know, and you can just continue to act like you don't know and just have blinders on. But I don't think we get anywhere like that, right? So I think there's a way to effectively communicate with someone and have the come to Jesus moment, right? And just let them know that maybe something they said was a little off base, and maybe they just really didn't know, and let them know it was inappropriate, it was uncomfortable, it was unwelcome, not helpful to the conversation.
Right.
Some people are just very mean-spirited and really know what they're doing, and those people probably should be canceled, right? But there are some that walk around that are just ignorant. I think of a time, and this is a little off base, but I think of a time when I was in high school. I went to an all-girl high school, which was predominantly white. Very few African-American girls there. And I remember I was coming out, it was in New York, of course, and I was coming to Florida for vacation. And I remember saying, oh, I'm going to be on the beach and I'm going to tan and I'm going to do this. And I remember one of my friends who was a, young white girl, didn't have any other Black friends probably but me, and was like, oh my God, you guys can tan? You guys, Black people can get tans? And she was being really innocent about it, right? She just had no idea.
Right.
I didn't take offense to it. It wasn't like she was insulting me. She just really had no idea. So there's some that walk around that really have no idea, right? But there's some that have an idea and just don't want to know anything else. So it's just like, I think it's still all of our responsibility to kind of make sure that we make those wrongs right. So I always take the notion to kind of step in and really educate, and educate from a place that they can get it and not maybe screaming and yelling and being, if they don't get it, because they'll be very defensive, but a place that they can really, kind of understand where you're coming from and kind of where it may have went left a little. So.
I would also just jump in there and say, and I'll put my mom hat on for a moment and take off my CEO hat. I love Raphael's story about the Christmas ornaments. I'm going to remember that for years to come. But as I think it starts at home too. As parents, we have to make sure that we are instilling the right values in our kids. I know for me, I have 2 little boys, and I am almost brainwashing them. You will be polite. You will be respectful. You will be chivalrous. You will recognize the differences in others. And I encourage them to have a diverse group of friends and to really recognize that people's differences do not mean a weakness or that anyone is inferior. And I'll tell you, my oldest child has a disability, and I'm grateful every day that the parents of his close friends have instilled that same value in their children, because it doesn't mean that he's different, he is different, but it doesn't mean that he's inferior. And it starts at home for me as a parent, more even so than it is as a CEO.
No. And I think those are the valid points, Shelly. So I think I was going to say it starts at the top. And I think it's 2 ways. It starts at the top, from that personal experience. It starts, a little bit at home. And then from a work experience, it starts that senior leadership. But I think a lot of times what happens is we get someone to come in, someone like me, who we pay thousands of dollars to do, unconscious bias training, and then we're done, right? And now everybody has recognized their unconscious bias and we're all fine and dandy. And no, we're not, they have to recognize their own privilege and unconscious bias through that. Then that needs to be trickled down to the leaders. How then can individual department leaders implement, their unconscious bias, and how does there a process for talking about it? And I think we have to normalize talking about it. So right now there's a pushback by, state legislators on critical race theory, which is, the foundation of all this work. And that's simply because people don't want to talk about it. And they feel that talking about it brings up the issues instead of creating a space where the issues can be talked about as a team. And so if there are team norms, like when unconscious bias comes up in our team, how are we going to respond to that? When we notice a team member cutting someone off, how are we going to bring that up as a team? When we notice that, you know, someone made an idea, someone else repackaged that idea and presented it, how are we going to bring that up as a team? And I think creating those norms and conversations initially, especially when you're developing new teams, can really help the flow of these conversations and normalize talking about it, so people don't feel like they have done something wrong, or that they are you know, racist or homophobic for asking these questions or making these statements, but more so it's a learning opportunity. And mind you, to I think Ashaki's point, now some people are just racist and homophobic. That is going to happen, but also but there are ways that we can also address that through policies. And everyone has to understand what those policies are, and there's a level of accountability that comes along with that. If there was no accountability for that, then this person will continue with those behaviors. So we have to implement some accountability along with these trainings and practices and these chief diversity officers that we're hiring. If there's no accountability for these things, the companies will never solve these problems.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because it's true. I mean, it starts at home at a very early age, and then in the workplace, who is the one that's responsible? You know, like you said, we can't just have a one-time training and check a box. Yep, we did unconscious bias training. We're all fixed. You know, it's all smooth sailing from here. And so having that, so being in a place of leadership, how do we foster that? To have that open door policy, how do we foster that in the workplace? Shelly and Ashaki, you know, you're both in places of leadership, and so how do you foster that and have those open conversations without, like you said, to your point, Raphael, make anybody feel that okay, they failed at something or they didn't do, but more of like a learning opportunity. So how do we keep these conversations going after the unconscious bias training? And I'll ask Ashaki, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, you know, it doesn't, I wouldn't say that it's even necessarily even just with keeping the open door policy, just with everything. So I've been in leadership roles, and I think just with, I've had an open door policy kind of with everything. So it's not just specific to this. So I think that I'm always interested in feedback, interested in talking to my team, interested in what they think, you know, soliciting their feedback, whether if they want to do something that's anonymous, you know, if they're, you know, have suggestions or any kind of different things that they want. So I think it'll kind of fall into this lane as well, because I think when you create that kind of environment, then nothing's kind of off limits, right? So it can be something where that someone can come to you, and if they have a question or a gray area about different things. And I think with, you know, me being in banking, there's a lot of different people you come across from a lot of different backgrounds. So especially being here in South Florida, and me originally being from New York, you know, it's a melting pot. And here, you know, it's a melting pot, but it's a little different melting pot. So a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different nationalities, a lot of different, you know, and genders and all those kind of different things, right? So I think that you have a lot of preconceived notions, and we're not all living in a bubble. So I think it's very important to kind of make sure your teams know that they can kind of come talk to you about anything, especially being in business. But if anything is, you know, so that they won't make those kind of wrong decisions, because you want to make sure that you're fostering that kind of environment. So.
And so thank you so much for sharing that, Ashaki. So another question, or I don't want to say pushback, but let's say the opposing argument, right? So when we're having these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and wanting to have all that in your environment, but then we also have like where people don't want to get sued, right? Because you can't ask somebody what's your sexual orientation. You know, you can't ask somebody what's your religion. You can ask somebody what's your race, and things like that. So how do we navigate that? How do we find that balance to having inclusion stuff, but without coming off as like discriminatory, right? Because up until D&I became really popular, it was like taboo. You don't talk about, you know, you can't ask somebody what their sexual orientation is. You can't ask them, you know, certain things that you can tell, you know, if you meet somebody in the meeting. But how do we find that balance? And I'll ask Shelly, then I'll ask Raphael as the person who does unconscious bias training.
Yeah, I mean, I can only really speak to my leadership style with that question, but my leadership style is all around empowerment. So, how do we empower our employees to not only maximize their skill sets and be the best that they can be for the organization, but also feel like they're working in a place that they have passion for and love to work at? So, I mean, I think Raphael's right. It starts at the top, and we have to lead by example. We have to empower our employees to feel comfortable enough to come to us or to speak up if something isn't right, and be very intentional about being solution driven. I think Ashaki said earlier, we can't just identify a problem and yet come up with solutions. That to me is just complaining versus moving the needle forward. So for my leadership style, it's really all about empowerment and leading by example. But I'm sure Raphael's got some good practices that he can give all of us. I was taking notes earlier.
Well, I think part of that empowerment comes from something we mentioned earlier and talking about, that visualization. So as leaders, begin to let's say put on the pedestal, but highlight women and minorities, more opportunities. So there's opportunities for women and marginalized groups in your workplace to speak and be in front of people that will really invalidate some of that competence or lack of competence that some people may think they have. Begin to create spaces for them to show their style and elevate them in a way, and also publicly acknowledge their accomplishment, publicly acknowledge their accomplishments, right? So if we want, them to continue to shine, give them that, and I think that also creates part of that. What you mentioned earlier, what you call imposter syndrome, where we walk into the room and there may be that only one, and we feeling like we're not good enough. But if we're continuously elevated, that helps. But also as leaders, we have to push back. And in terms of that, comes through hiring practices. There's this word fit, right? That we love to use. Yeah. And so, all right, so this person is not a good fit. All right, well, give me 3 reasons on how they are a good fit. And I think when we begin to talk about the competence that we have, and so the competence that folks don't have, I think the frame also changes a little bit, because I think a lot of times we talk about women and minorities from this lens of things that we can do, or the resume doesn't have this. Well, what does the resume have, and how does it relate to this role? And so a lot of times it needs to happen in those hiring practices as well. And I think the other piece I loved about, Shelly mentioned empowerment. I think some of that, without asking staff members, are you queer? Or, I'm not sure they look like a person of color. Are they Black, Latino? We don't know. But, having employee resource groups, having those groups available where that they're going to find that support and that validation still in the workplace, but within groups of people who share similar identities. And so that, will also make them feel more welcome in the workplace and be more productive and feel like they can be themselves also in their work team by having this ERG where they can let their hair down a little bit in their ERG, and that ERG can also implement some of this work that we know that needs to be done. So, and I think that the last piece of that is also just celebrating some of those identities, Women's History Month, acknowledging, Women's Black History Month. This month is Pride Month. And even like I worked on a document today that the border around the photo had a rainbow. And I did that unintentionally because it was just the platform had limited availability. And one of my colleagues like, oh, I see the pride hint. And I was like, yeah, not quite, but sure. But, find ways to celebrate the identities, even if they're not represented in your company. And that's the other piece of it too, because we have to get used to seeing that, because it may be represented in our company. And that goes to Shelly mentioned our kids, even at home. And so we can teach our kids that, but how are they seeing those other pieces, things? Or if they're not in a diverse school, Juneteenth is coming up. Are we taking, if we're not, Black, are we taking our kids who may not identify as Black to a Juneteenth celebration, or helping them understand Asian Heritage Month, or taking them to a movie that we would traditionally see that is sharing other identities? So we have to do those things inside and out of the workplace to normalize us seeing different identities. And I think that also helps foster that inclusive growth.
I love that. Okay, so I have a follow-up question, and then I'm gonna ask anybody who's anyone in the audience who has any questions to kind of send them over. We'll try to address those. But the last question I asked, and then we'll have closing remarks. The last question is, what do we say to people who feel or had this misconception about D&I being, well, we have to hire women just because we, those people are like, well, I'm not going to hire a woman just because she's a woman. And so they have this misconception of what D&I and DE&I mean. What do we say to those people? And how do we get them to understand what it means to have D&I and to hopefully turn them over and to become allies? I'll ask Shelly.
I mean, I hate to be repetitive, but I go back to the business case. I mean, there's so much good data out there that shows that having an inclusive workplace yields to stronger revenue results and things of that nature. So, I mean, to me, you always have to have a counter argument. If someone makes a statement like that, I'm going to have my counter argument at the ready with data to back it up. But I would also just say, I think as leaders, we have to make sure that when we are evaluating people, that we are evaluating them based on their skills and their personality versus the color of their skin, their gender, what have you. And the more that we can do that as leaders, my hope would be that it would trickle down to the rest of the organization as well. But that would be my 2 cents.
Somebody answered, we just tell those kind of people to kick rocks. That's one way. That's one solution. One approach. Ashaki, what would you say? Well, I guess here I will start with, what are some closing remarks that you would want anybody who's a woman in business facing these challenges, or a person who's in a leadership role who has influence over who's, what are some closing remarks you would like to leave with our audience with? Ashaki?
Sure. So I would say just a lot of times, don't be afraid to be the only woman in the room. Sometimes you can be the first. How I met Lydia, that wound up being a room full of men of all different ages, and just me, and the one female in the room with maybe 25 other men. And I wasn't afraid to be the only one in the room, but I also implored and encouraged all the other men of the importance of having other female professionals in the room. So I made them actually work for me and made them solicit and look for other professional women that we could add to our group, because I wanted them to see the value in that, and not necessarily look for maybe the buddy down the hall that maybe was in their office that maybe they were thinking of. I made them think that, okay, yeah, we really need to advocate and make sure that we get some other strong professional women in here that we can do business with. So I would say, just don't be afraid to be the only one, but make sure you're not the only one, right? You can start off being the only one, but make sure to grow that circle around you and encourage other women to join you. So that's what I would.
I love it. Raphael?
I think in terms of that piece, one, we have to have hiring practices that sort of remove bias, right? And so some of that can be, panels that we're evaluated on, and having rubrics that we really look at and evaluate candidates so that we know that we have the most inclusive and fair hiring process. So that's the one of the main points in getting it there. The second thing is that I want to leave with in terms of final thoughts is just a quote from Michelle Obama when, as we all begin to counter unconscious bias based on our identities. And she said that, she's been in some of the most important rooms in the world, with CEO, world leaders, prime ministers. And then she just ends with, they're not that damn smart. And so I just want everyone to remember that they're not that damn smart. You might be the smartest person in the room, but because of the societal norms that we have been taught about ourselves, even, and in some cases, that we have, the syndrome walking into it. So just remember to begin to, lift yourself up and really recognize what you bring to the table when you're in those spaces.
Yeah, I love that, Lydia. And it kind of bounces off of what I was going to say in that, don't let yourself operate from a place of fear. Right. Don't let your insecurities get the best of you. be confident, show your value, and keep your head up, you know? And I love, because like Raphael just said, you very well might be the smartest person in the room. And if you let your fears and insecurities get to you, they're going to step in front of all the great ideas and contributions that you can make. And it's easy, I think, in the workplace to operate from a place of fear. It takes strength to operate from an offensive perspective, if you will, and to have that confidence. So don't be afraid, and don't let your insecurities get the best of you.
I love these. I am just taking notes. I am so grateful to all of you. I told you guys we're going to go run over, and I'm actually going to stop it now because I want to be mindful of everyone's workday. But I told you this conversation was going to be amazing, and we're going to go over. But I am so grateful for all of you showing up and sharing your stories and allowing yourselves to be vulnerable, and sharing that. Audience, I thank you all for showing up, for posting your comments, and if anyone wants to reach you guys, we have your social media handles on our website. You can reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to share the information for all our speakers that join us today. And again, to our speakers, thank you so much for sharing your insight and your expertise, and just being raw. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I feel like there's going to be a part 2 brewing. So look out for that. I think there's so much more to talk about. But with that, we're going to end today. And thank you so much for showing up. And I wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.